Okay, so light logic. We have our basic shapes measured and drawn out, and I'm going to go over this with you real quick. So just analyzing the parts of shadow and light, it's important to know this information. I don't do vocabulary quizzes, so you're not going to have to worry about memorizing it right now, but it's just for information that as you're developing something like an anatomy class, if you're investigating the body, you should probably know the parts that you're picking apart. So the highlight is the highest light. So our 1 on our value scale that we did. Don't confuse the highlight with the little white in your eye, that glint that comes off. That's technically called a specular reflection. It's just a very specific name for something that it's a glossy surface usually that's reflecting light. That's different than the highest light. A reflective surface or a glossy surface will have the specular reflection. The midtone, also called the halftone, the middle values in the light. The middle values in the light. The terminator. So the terminator is actually this boundary right here. If you look on it, right where the midtone turns to this darkest part. In our 1-to-1 line drawing, that's basically what this middle line was, the terminator point. It's just kind of this boundary, because right here, right after the terminator, is the core shadow, which is the darkest part of the shadow. It's usually going to look like, in the most optimal lighting conditions, it's going to look like a darker band just going across. You're not going to have a shadow or a form that's consistently dark all the way through. It's going to be a little bit of a band getting darker, and then it's going to get slightly lighter because of the reflected light. So unless this thing is floating in space, there's going to be light bouncing from any other objects around it, the table, the floor. There can be light coming in from windows. So there's going to be a little bit of light that comes, the light's coming from this direction, and passes on the sides of the sphere and bounce up from the table and light it just a little bit. So it's going to go its darkest value in the core shadow, and then it's going to go slightly lighter as we go into this reflected light. This reflected light should never be as light as the midtone area. It's still going to be darker if you took it out and placed it in here than the light area. So the darkest lights right before the terminator, you can say this is in the dark, this is in the light, and this is in the dark. The darkest lights in here are still going to be lighter than the lightest darks down here. So if your shadows, if you have almost this halo effect coming in, you're going a little too extreme to the light down here. Sometimes people want to leave this almost as light as this. It's really just a very subtle thing. Those two things, the core shadow and the reflected light on anything, if you're inventing it from your head, will instantly make something feel like it has much more volume. It'll give it the realistic illusion. It's pushing things a little bit, because you're not going to normally see the core shadow so dark as, you know, this one. You can see a little bit more of that band coming through here. You're not normally going to see that, but if you intensify the light, it would emerge. Sometimes you can just see them around. I can set something up later on. And the cast shadow. So everything on the form is called a form shadow. It's the object turning away from the light in space, whereas the cast shadow is the object in the direct path of light. And so it's blocking out the light and forming a cast shadow. The form shadow is going to be nice and soft and transition much more like the gradient that we did. And the cast shadow is usually going to have harder edges and be a very specific shape. This can be, totally different based on whatever object you're painting. This is usually like a very specific shape, much sharper. Whether or not that shape is, it's becoming a circle or whatever. It might not be like that, but the boundary will be very obvious. Okay, so I'm going to draw these out for y'all real quick. So a cube is super easy. We have the light coming in from this direction. It's hitting this top face. Probably is a little bit more above. It's hitting the top face and totally lighting up this top face. So this is a 1 on the value scale, the lightest light. And then this side will generally get a tiny bit darker. Just because the light's hitting the top here, and this face is not facing directly onto the light. If it was equal in light, what you'd be describing is this, and it's not this, it's this on that corner. So just slightly darker, because there's definitely going to be more of a chance of this side getting a little bit more lit up, but it's not going to be as light as this. Even if in real life, it looks like it's as light as that, pushing it darker just a little bit will help make it more of a convincing drawing. You can see photographs and you can take photographs, and the way we view photographs and understand photographs in society is usually something we accept as truth, absolute truth. But if you're taking an image of something with one lens and we see with 2 eyes, there's going to be a lot of loss of information there. So sometimes in drawings, we have to play it up. So like if you think about TV acting or movie acting versus theater, like live theater acting, or even the makeup too. If you look at a live theater performance of people, they look normal when they're on the stage. When you get up close, they have over exaggerated makeup on, and they tend to overact. And part of that is to sell you kind of on the immersion. It's easy to get out of the immersion when you're in a theater because you can look around and there's people next to you. You can clearly see the curtains and everything. So when they overact, it helps to sell the performance versus when you're home alone and it's all dark and you're watching this huge screen and you're, pretty much close enough that you can just focus on that one thing. They don't have to act like that because you're already suspending your disbelief more. So it's kind of like that with drawing, where we have to overact a tiny bit, even if we don't see those things. If I know that it could be there, I'm going to play it up a little bit. So a little bit lighter so that it doesn't look like it's flat, all one surface. And then this will be the darkest side. And there will be a really sharp boundary. So a sharp edge right here. This is technically all form shadow, you could say, but it's really so separated on anything with planes that it acts in kind of the same way that a cast shadow does, where it has really sharp boundaries. Cut this, cut this. This is just from the shadow that I observed. It'll get darker, and then oftentimes at the very end, the cast shadow will still be dark, but it'll kind of lose its edge just slightly as the kind of strength of that shadow is fading. Cool. So I'll do the cylinder next, just because it's kind of like a combination. Oh, I'll mention this when we go from life too. Generally, when you're drawing a cube, you'll have this side, and this side all parallel to each other. This side and this side will be pretty parallel to each other. This side and this bottom ledge will be parallel to each other. These can be parallel, but it depends on where it exists in relationship to your eye line. Just watch for this. But oftentimes people will have just kicking in barely, and that's kind of describing a different shape that's twisting a little bit. So the cylinder, the cylinder is going to have the core shadow more obvious. We're saying light's coming from here. We're going to have the lid up top, like the cube, and then light is going to be hitting here. And then this form all around the cylinder is rotating away from the light. So it's going from light and turning into the darkness. This will be darker. This will be a little bit darker. And then we'll have a dark band in here. You're going to have a little bit of reflected light on this side. Then we'll have our shadow kicking out. So in much of the same way that I can draw lines cross contour across this cylinder to describe the form, I can do the same thing with a sphere, except it's in all directions. So if we're coming in from this point, it's turning away this way, 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 in all directions like this. So we have the highest light. Let me erase that. It's not the highest light. We have the core shadow. And if you think about the core shadow too, it's kind of like if you took a melon and you took a sword and sliced through diagonally through it. Or if you even look at those old diagrams they have in science books of like a core, like cutting into it so that you can see the layers, the mantle, the core, and all those other layers of the earth. It's going to be like that. So it's going to be a circle at an angle depending on the angle of the light in relationship to you and this sphere. So that can be kind of hard to visualize until you think of it. It should be slicing through the sphere. So we have the core shadow. It's darker down here. So a little bit lighter in here. Touching this. And then we'll have the cast shadow. Like that. And what I would focus on, especially the sphere is the most complicated one and kind of the most important, I think. The cube is super easy to understand. It's just three different shapes basically with lights. Really focus on getting this nice and smooth, this transition right here. If you kind of cut a little strip out and followed it, it would be essentially part of that gradient that we did from light to darkest here, and then it will be a nice transition here, and then you just overlay it all around. I find the easiest way to do this is kind of how I was doing it here, where I know that the vine charcoal is going to get me to like a 5 or 6 on the scale. So I'll usually just color in basically, all this. I already have, when I blend this out, it'll build it up to a 5 or 6 on the scale. And then just go in and darken the areas that I need to more and more. Instead of having to focus on moving light, getting dark, and then getting slightly lighter. It's easier to just push it in that direction already. And then with the kneaded eraser, if I need to remove a little bit, or the paper towel, if I need to remove a little bit in the reflected light, I can do that. So I find that's the easiest way to kind of work on those. So if you have all these done, you can start doing this. If you did them in graphite, I'm going to show you really quickly how to transfer. Or if you have something that's a little too messy for you. So you can take your drawing and lay a piece of paper over it. Sketchbook paper or printer paper works really well. Tracing paper works the best, but you don't need to buy extra paper for this. And you can see, actually you can see it better in the display than I can in real life. You can trace it. You can also tape it to the wall or tape it to the glass, and the light coming in will reflect that a little bit more, or will shine through the paper rather. So now I have a copy. And what I would want to do is then flip this over. Why does that happen? Well, that's not. Flip this over so that this is now face down. So I have the graphite tracing face down, and then taking your charcoal and retracing it. This is why it's easier just to do it graphite or charcoal to begin with. I'm only going to do a little bit of that. So I should have retraced. So I have graphite on this side from the original tracing, flipped it over, and I retraced what was on this side in charcoal. Now I want to do charcoal side to the paper and trace that, or redraw it rather, for a third time. You don't have to use a lot of pressure for that, just enough to transfer it. And then you have something in charcoal that won't be a problem, you know, erasing or moving around. Because if you do it in graphite, you might have a little bit of a problem with the charcoal adhering to the graphite. So if you want to get started on the modeling, you can. If you came in late, there are the handouts all up here. You should have this reference sheet for the light logic, and then a reference for the modeled versions of the sphere, the cube, and the cylinder. So any questions? No? So we're just going to work on these for the rest of the class. I'll be around to help you guys because it feels a little more straightforward, but getting the nuance, especially in the sphere is the most complex one, can be a little bit tricky. It's like this one. You just move it over there. Wow. That's fine. That's fine with you. To lower it, it's this one at the bottom. Yeah, just make sure you have your hand. Yeah. I'll do the other one. So when you're starting later, it's going to be way easier to design and kind of blend in that around. I would build that up until you can't, until it feels like you're not adding anything else, and then you can start going into the compressed pencil. I also find it easiest to draw the form first and resolve that, and then draw the shadow and start shading that in. Just because, maybe not autofocus. Sometimes it allows you a little bit more room to be slightly messy when you're trying to blend things in. You don't have to be perfect staying inside the shape. That way, if you blow out this way into the cast shadow, you're going to get darker anyway in that area, so it's not going to be that big of a deal. Yeah, that's all. No, we're doing that. You already did it. You did today. Yes. Yeah, today we're going to start shading in the basic shapes that we drew. You don't have to redraw these. It's just the ones that you already did. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you redrew them, that's extra practice for you. But no, you don't have to have the line drawing. The line drawing was just making sure everyone was there with the correct measurements to begin with, and now just building on top of that. If you want extra practice, you can go about redrawing them, but.
like mobility and some people like smear it like reverse.
Yeah. Another thing that you can do that's pretty helpful for getting the lighter values is kind of stealing from the darks. Instead of having to put charcoal up here, I can just take the charcoal and smear it upwards and get a lighter value. Because sometimes when you put the charcoal on directly, it already jumps to, you're trying to get like a 2 in the value scale, and it already jumps to like a 4 if you put it on directly. So smushing it up, blending it up will help you get kind of that lighter value in there.
With the darkest shadow part being the part where the edges are the hardest.
The edges will be the hardest on the cast shadow down here, but it's going to still be pretty smooth throughout the form shadow. And here, even when it's the darkest, it'll transition pretty softly into the other values. It will probably be, so the cash shadow for the cube will probably be a little bit darker than the darker side of the cube, just because the cube tends to get a lot of light pollution around reflecting on it. The other ones will probably be as dark as the floor show. That's not going to be super important, just making sure that it's, because there is no really formula for that, it's all first observation. When we set up the lines, just make sure that it's darker than the midtones or the. Specifically for the proportions of this. What your shadow is saying is that, so this shadow is saying that this light is going to be right here, that's why it's in the shadow. Yours in English, where will, yours is almost a different falling forward to us. So I think it's really just making it a little bit thinner, like moving, this looks fine, moving this up a little bit here will make it feel like. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit. Yeah, just soften that. As you put in the values, you might notice that you need to kind of, your proportions were off in areas that you didn't realize. It's totally fine to kind of move those things around at this point. Some of it is the deception of the values getting put in. Because if you look on mine right here, I had it pretty round before, but now I'm seeing this edge that almost, this side right here almost looks flat. as if it was like a ball of clay and I dropped it and it's flat on this side. So I'd have to probably go back in and erase some of this and push this out slightly. But I think it's also this dark, if you see this triangle of dark right here, that's making it feel like it's one flat plane, like the cube, basically. Just in this spot though. Yeah, 1 second.
This came out a little bit right.
One, I would start. Vine chart. Yeah, and then I would even play this. Yeah, with the green sticker on the back. Oh, also with, I mean, you can't see it as much with mine. With the vine charcoals will sometimes have gradients too, as in like the HBB H. This is the B version of this, just as a reference going forward. That's the only one I used. The other two are good too, but they're just, this one has a better range, like I said, with the pencil, that you can get the lighter marks if you just add less pressure and then layer it to get darker. One of the other things too is when you are using the paper towel to kind of work the charcoal into the paper, you get a really nice smooth blend, but the other benefit too is that the charcoal is in the paper more, and so that when you're transporting it around, it won't, the drawing is less likely to smear around because the charcoal is in the paper instead of just sitting on top like a powder. So working on that will help you have a cleaner drawing, having to transport this all around from class and back home. Also, if you want something interesting to think about while you're working on these smooth blendings, charcoal is probably the oldest drawing material of all time. And so this dates back all the way to caveman times, and we're still using this same material. Can you not do this? Says your link. Maybe 1 second. I'll be right there. Give me 1 second. Yeah. I would use the fine charcoal first, just because it'll be a little bit lighter. Yeah, this will go straight to the dark. With no, just kind of see it. If you go over the charcoal, it might not stick as much on the ground. I would, I think if you're having no problems, I do that. Seems like you're already. But I would, it feels like you're. And with the eraser, you can always. You might, there's like a brush shift right there. Don't worry, it's just something that dirty. As long as it doesn't have to be white, as long as it's lighter. Vine charcoal? Yeah,
Vine charcoal?
vine, yeah, like a hanging from a tree vine. Yeah,
Or the,
yeah, or the dead app.
I like the texture. I don't know how to describe it. I can actually like replicate what I see on the paper. Using this.
Yeah, it's way more forgiving too, that if you do make a mistake, it's easy to go back on it versus the pencil is kind of, it's a little more permanent.
Like with charcoal, I'm more likely to be hard-handed and.
The pencil charcoal, yeah, because that's still charcoal, that's just vine charcoal.
Yeah, it's lighter.
Yeah, yeah.
Those little nuances that, like, how, like, use your hand.
Uh-huh.
I find that way easier than like,
Yeah. Yeah, especially with when you start really building those values, then you know, keeping your hand away from the paper helps to also not smush all that out.
Yeah,
that you've done.
especially in a heavy-handed person, you know.
That's why I also like to make y'all sharpen the pencil so sharp because it takes away your heavy handedness because you're going to break it every time if you default to being like back to that. Yeah, so if you look up on mine, there's a little bit of light pollution here, but I'm only now starting to go into the compressed charcoal because this is, I smushed in with all the vine over here. That's pretty much as dark as I can go with the vine. So now I'm going in, and that's a pretty good range of like 1 to 6. Like I had to go lighter here, but I'm not gonna get into my light right away because I know I'm probably gonna have to constantly re-erase into here. So I'm not super worried about that right now. But now I'm going in just on the core shadow area with the compressed charcoal so I can kind of spill over up and down to darken both sides, both areas if I need to. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, give me 1 second.
This part. Right on video. I would just do this as one value. Blend it in. Separate it and then start with this. Yeah, I think that's a good rate. I would push this a little darker. But it's almost that, it's not that it's darker. Push it further. I would just go, instead of going. Just to consolidate. But yeah.
A few things I'd say. One, it feels very natural to want to have a line as the boundary of your shapes. If you're, some of this, like, I have a little bit of a line on this one, mostly because when I copy this, it almost blows out if I don't have that there. But I would go a little bit lighter. You can see one barely here. You want it to be around the same value as whatever's in that area. Thinking back to the sharp versus soft edges. The lines that kind of dictate the boundary are the same value as the value around it. So you don't want really dark outlines. Sometimes in the areas that are, if this is a 1 and the paper is a 1, I need a little bit of an outline to corral in that shape. And you'll have a little bit of an outline, but try to make that as light as possible. And the other thing too, squeezing in as many values as possible. Up here, I think I need to work on my lights. I have good darks, I think. I need to push my lights now, so that this is a little bit more of a transition from here into here, into the midtones. And also making sure that my reflected value is going to be darker still than my midtones. It shouldn't be super light. It's going to be a very subtle shift right here. And also you can see how messy, I'm not being super careless with it, but I have all the blending has kind of gotten fuzzy around here. Getting a vinyl eraser or the kneaded eraser, so like plastic white erasers is a vinyl eraser. And then just, I still can see my boundary through here. Just cleaning up all of the outside. Kind of reshape that. We'll kind of re-reveal my circle. And will give me a little bit less of a headache trying to keep this completely clean, especially with the vine charcoal. That's pretty much all vine charcoal outside the boundary. And it's super easy to clean up. Oh, also, I've noticed some people have brushes. I really love using the brush. Know that as you use the brush though, like if you go into the dark area, you're gonna be picking up dark pigment into your brush. So then if you wanna move into the light area, make sure you have a piece of paper around and you can, just clean it off by doing this. So you're not just depositing that super dark pigment into your lighter areas as you blend. Same thing basically with the paper towel too. If you're blending a dark area, you're gonna have the dark pigment loaded on here. So as I move to the light, I'm gonna find a cleaner area to kind of use to blend. It should be enough. Well, you can just remove it here, just so that you have a little bit more light information in here, but I think the dark is And then that's this stuff. I think your scale's fine. Yeah, really try to push the illusion of form in there by, one, the more and more values you can squeeze in anywhere will help give someone who's looking at it their brain information to understand the form more and more. And minimizing your outline too. If you have an outline around it that's pretty dark, the one place you can get away with outlines is in your darkest areas. So on these edges, because I'm already going pretty dark, putting in, what might be a darker outline will be fine because the value around it is already darker, so I can corral that shape in. And then if I'm going dark in the cast shadow, I've noticed some people are losing their form just a little bit on this boundary. Pushing your cast shadow a little bit darker will be helpful because then you can put in kind of an outline, which isn't really an outline because it's just making, if I isolate this, one sharp shape here with a sharp edge that's defining the soft edge of the sphere. And that's kind of why I like drawing the cast shadow second, because I have the sphere pretty well finished. There's a little bit that I want to kind of put in more, but now I can just draw this cast shadow up against this form, and I have a nice boundary there. It helps to define it without them kind of blurring together too much. I think if you look too in my context, without the cast shadow there, this reflected light that I had, it felt like it was dark enough, but now that I have this dark value right next to it, I think it's a little too light, so I'll have to darken that a little bit more. This should be a little bit lighter.
I would tell you, it's like,
This is all going to be due on the critique day, which I think is next week. So the key emphasis is quality and craftsmanship. Making sure you have nice, smooth blends is going to be really important as we go into the next project. So make sure you're working on those, pushing your values, going darker. Even if you go pretty dark, pushing it even darker will help create the illusion of form more and more. So even if you're at a point where like, okay, I think this is pretty dark, there's no reason to really grind your charcoal into your paper, but not stopping at a point that's just a 7. You want to push to that 9 if you can. September 8th, yes, September 8th is the critique. So tomorrow or Wednesday, we're going to work on more complex shapes, doing the same thing. September 3rd will be a work day. We're not going to have class on September 6th, which is Labor Day. So you'll have that to finish this up. And then September 8th is when this is going to be due for critique on that Wednesday, September 8th.
It looks so much darker up there.
Yeah,
Than it
yeah.
does when
I
you-
try not to because it looks pretty dark on here.
Yeah,
Um,
so saturated.
I try not to draw off of what this looks like. But I was trying to adjust it a little
I
bit.
get what you mean now, that pushing it further.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you start seeing it like come
Right.
out. It tricks you too.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Make sure that your area, if there's charcoal all over it, wipe it down. Yeah, after you wipe down your area, you can go. You're free to leave.
I'm sorry, I took the class today. I was second track, but it was like 20 minutes after getting loaded off. Or else I would have been on time.
Yes.
I just want to let you know.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.